Yes.
Thank you. Dear President of ECOSOC, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, dear participants, I am pleased to welcome all of you today in person and online to the thematic event called Building Resilience Through Quality and Sustainable Infrastructure Connectivity. Before I continue with welcoming remarks, I would like to kindly remind participants online to keep their microphones muted and to turn them on only when given the floor. There will be time for interventions later on. Additionally, please be aware that this event is an open event and it's also being recorded with the purpose of having a recording that can be shared afterwards. Lastly, I realize that this event is happening at the same time as the World Cup semi-finals. I trust that we will keep each other updated on the scores as we go. Dear colleagues, soccer aside, in today's discussion we are covering some big themes: infrastructure, resilience, regional and interregional cooperation. This event is co-organized by missions of Latvia and Poland and co-sponsored by mission of Japan. We are happy to see so many participants, including PRs, finding the time in their busy schedule and end-of-year agendas to join the discussion as we look forward to hear about the challenges we share and the diverse perspectives we might have. Therefore, I'm especially pleased to welcome to New York a representative from Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, my dear colleague, Ambassador at Large for 3C Initiative, Mr. Edgars Bondars, who has been instrumental in making this event happening today. Ambassador Bondars is here to share Latvia's perspective on the topics of today's discussion and showcase the 3C Initiative. This is a politically inspired, commercially driven platform for improving connectivity between 12 EU member states located between Baltic, Adriatic and Black Seas, thus contributing to the resilience of these countries and regions. Before I move on, just a few reflections. It is clear that here is a significant global investment gap worldwide, and the infrastructure gap is especially stark in developing countries. As a proud member of the Team Europe, we are closely following the rollout of the EU Global Gateway Strategy that seeks to address this challenge and the demand for investment, high-quality infrastructure, whilst ensuring high environmental and social standards. That said, it is also true that ensuring proper connectivity can be challenged in developed countries as well. COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's war against Ukraine, climate change have revealed long-existing and new vulnerabilities. It has required a rethinking of approaches and reinforcement of commitment and efforts. Case in point, for a long time, the Baltic region was effectively an energy island, lacking interconnections with other EU member states, and thus vulnerable to the risks that come with over-reliance on a single supplier and lack of access to regional and global markets. Years to focus on investing in infrastructure, market reforms and regional cooperation. We see that it's no longer the case. We are not an energy island anymore. However, in light of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we have again been challenged to deepen our integration with regional and global energy markets at more rapid pace and speed up the green transition to secure alternative sources of energy. That will require development of quality infrastructure with the objective of building more resilient energy system, economy and society. This is just one example to demonstrate the perspectives and experience that we expect to share today. We hope that this event will be useful in identifying ways of approaching connectivity gaps, best practices to develop quality, sustainable and resilient infrastructure, including in the digital domain. Now it's time to turn to the opening speaker of our agenda, and I would like to warmly welcome our dear colleague, the President of ECOSOC, Ambassador Lachezara Stoeva of Bulgaria. Madam President, thank you for accepting our invitation to address this event, and we very much look forward to what you want to share especially in light of the upcoming ECOSOC season that will culminate with next year's high-level political forum. Madam President, please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you all for being here with us now. And you've already showed your resilience by resisting to the temptation outside, which is the game. And it is a great pleasure to join you for this timely and important thematic event. Few topics could be more pertinent in these trying times. The world faces a public crisis where the causes and consequences of the current geopolitical, food, fuel, finance, climate crisis, and other shocks are all increasingly entangled worldwide. Instead of narrow solutions, we need integrated, joined-up solutions that are resilient to all kinds of shocks, even for issues that in the past were considered primarily issues of national or regional nature. Very important examples here are energy, transport, water, and digital infrastructures, which were also just mentioned by Ambassador Piltegovic. Infrastructure is essential for the implementation of the 2030 agenda, particularly for development and poverty eradication-related goals and targets. SDG 9, which is Build Resilient Infrastructure, Promote Inclusive and Sustainable Industrialization and Foster Innovation, will be one of the goals that will be reviewed in depth at the 2023 High-Level Political Forum. Connectivity is a defining feature of today's world. There is ample evidence for the positive medium to long-term effect of infrastructure connectivity on economic growth and development. The global value chains call for increasing levels of transport connectivity amongst countries. Poor infrastructure connectivity means additional costs, delays, uncertainties, and other hindrances for countries that are trying to access regional and global markets. Energy infrastructure connectivity that promotes diversification of supplies and transit routes is a source of resilience, not vulnerability. Efforts are needed to support cross-border and cross-regional infrastructure serving multiple countries. This calls for increased multilateral cooperation around infrastructure. The infrastructure needs of lower-income countries are particularly challenging. Many of them are still lacking reliable infrastructure concerning electricity, water, mobility, and digitalization. Developing infrastructure of quality means ensuring its compliance with the highest technical, environmental, accounting, and labor standards. Countries also need sustainable infrastructure systems that are planned, designed, constructed, operated, and decommissioned in a manner that guarantees environmental sustainability over the entire infrastructure life cycle. The infrastructure systems need to be resilient. As mentioned by the most recent IPCC report on adaptation, widespread, pervasive impacts to ecosystems, people, settlements, and infrastructure have resulted from observed increases in the frequency and intensity of climate and weather extremes. Quality resilient and sustainable infrastructure needs to absorb shocks and effectively adapt to the long-term pressure trends that will emerge from climate change. Nature-based infrastructure solutions and approaches offer a cost-effective alternative to conventional infrastructure which have proven to be more resilient and can contribute to mitigate the impact of climate change. Developing resilient digital infrastructure is also critical for sustainable development. Increased access to the internet can create new jobs, contribute to GDP, lift people out of poverty, and increase resilience of communities. However, 2.7 billion people, roughly one-third of the global population, remain unconnected to the internet. Meaningful digital connectivity requires effective action on accessible and affordable infrastructure and devices and appropriate application and services built upon the infrastructure. The Global Digital Compact, proposed by the Secretary General, is a way of improving infrastructure and addressing concerns that come with connectivity. All stakeholders should increase efforts to close the digital infrastructure gap and to leverage digital technologies to power key initiatives in support of achieving a greener and more inclusive digital world and a just and sustained development for all, leaving no one behind. Colleagues, improved international cooperation leads to better results. We need more support and collaboration for countries to address the root causes of crisis and build quality, resilient, and sustainable infrastructures, including the technology infrastructures for the future. It is my hope that our deliberations today will also highlight new avenues as we prepare for the high-level political forum in July and for the SDG summit in 2023. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, for these comprehensive opening remarks and highlighting some of the key milestones for the forthcoming period that we can look forward to and perhaps address some of the expectations to them also today. Now I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, permanent representative of Poland, Ambassador Krzysztof Szczerski, to set the scene and moderate our discussion today. Please.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the colleagues from Mission of Latvia and Japan for organizing this event, and Ambassador Bondars to come to New York to share his experience and perspective from Riga. Just to say the way we think, and so to make this discussion in a way that structures the way of thinking. No, we all know that the infrastructure is the backbone of every society. It's providing essential services such as energy, water, transport, and telecommunications. And from that point of view, it is, of course, in the heart of efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. At the same time, we know that the infrastructure should not be viewed as individual assets, but as a system of linkages that enhance connectivity between the individual societies, economies, and countries, and regions. And so infrastructure is, of course, to be able to fully deliver social, economic, and environmental benefits must be quality in a sense of being sustainable, comprehensive, anchored in appropriate regulatory frameworks. But in the same time, and we know that all, that's been debated, and that's part of the SDGs and Agenda 2030, this sort of looking at the infrastructure as the very important asset for the from different perspectives. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that infrastructure is increasingly exposed to a number of risks, and the recent experiences showed us the list of these risks that the infrastructure is exposed to. COVID pandemic showed the unprecedented operational impediments and strained regional and global strained the regional and global supply chains. The ongoing conflicts, including the war in Ukraine, shows that the major regional and global supply chains disruptions and demands for diversification. The climate change showed us the higher frequency of interruptions stemming from the natural disasters. Infrastructure will be increasingly affected by the impacts of the climate disruptions. So keeping that in mind, when developing a new or enhancing existing infrastructure systems, we believe that we should have in mind not just the development and the quality, but also how to address these challenges and how infrastructure connectivity can be used as a tool for building resilience for the future shocks, societal and economic resilience. That's what already been heard from the Madam President. So, and we believe that although the crises and challenges are felt around the world, each region is affected differently. So we have to have regional responses to the global challenges of the building infrastructure resilience. This is why the panel discussion we will first hear about is regional and interregional perspectives on developing infrastructure from the point of view of resilience. The second angle of our discussion is as I said, development and resilience, the two aspects. First, the infrastructure must itself be resilient to the shock and stresses it will encounter, then in turn enables us to make the essential contribution to the sustainable development and overall resilience of societies by ensuring that the vital services infrastructure provides are less vulnerable to extreme events and disruptions. So that's how we see the scene of today's debate and how we look at this problems and issues that can be raised today at this event. And without further ado, I will introduce now our distinguished panelists. After the panel discussion, we'll open the floor for the interventions to learn about other perspectives from of the UN member states and about lessons learned and the best practices stemming from the regional, interregional infrastructure cooperation. The first speaker is Mr. Edgars Bondars, already been introduced, Ambassador at Large for the 3Cs Initiative, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Latvia, who will present the 3Cs Initiative, which aims to promote cooperation for development and infrastructure in the energy, transport and digital sectors among the countries located between the Baltic, Black and Adriatic Seas. The second speaker is Mr. Shu Nakagawa, Head of the Economic Section in the Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations, who will speak on the topic of regional and interregional cooperation on infrastructure connectivity, including the cooperation between Asia and Europe. The third speaker is Ms. Fabrian Irwati Masema, Head of the Economic Section of the Permanent Mission of Indonesia to the United Nations, who will speak on about promoting sustainable and resilient infrastructure in the context of the work of G20, which Indonesia is presiding now. And the final speaker on the panel is Mr. Hugh Bayon, the Deputy Chief of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, New York Liaison Office, who will focus on infrastructure resilience as the key component of the Sendai framework. Mr. Bayon will also present the main finding of the recent, very interesting report of the office called The Principles for Resilient Infrastructure. Let me say that I'm very honored to give the floor first to Ambassador Edgars Bondars. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Krzysztof, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, excellencies. In 2015, leaders of 12 EU countries located between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Seas joined forces, and the 3Cs initiative was started. Initiative is a solid platform that offers a complementary base for meaningful discussions and practical cooperation. Needs to join efforts arose out of similar historical experience in the region, geographical location, and a common European path. As previously was mentioned by my colleague Andres Pildegovic, 3Cs initiative is politically inspired but commercially driven. By this, importance of cooperation between public and private sectors was underlined in transport, energy, and the digital fields. 3Cs initiative is about creating connectivity that is trusted, reliable, and with the goal to increase the resilience in the region. 12 participating states of the 3Cs initiative in many ways are fully integrated into the fabric of Europe and share common goals to develop infrastructure connectivity. This year's Riga summit focused on the development of better resilience throughout the region, emphasizing the importance of the closely connected region. War in Ukraine has changed the economic geography of 3Cs region. Our energy, transport, and digital connectivity was placed in sharp focus, and logistic chains were being challenged. New sources and capacities for energy are urgently needed across our region, so we may continue to grow and stay resilient. However, our needs are still manageable compared with the rebuilding that Ukraine will require after the war will be ending. Latvia envisages a close partnership between 3Cs initiative and Ukraine, given that we are neighbors in terms of geographical location and have strong common values. In Riga summit, Ukraine was invited to join 3Cs initiative with immediate effect, and this was also reflected in the declaration of Riga summit. Besides the political part of the summit, business forum was taking place. It was organized with the aim to link vision with future connectivity with action. From the business perspective, 3Cs initiative goal is to reach trusted connectivity, achieved in cooperation with investors who share our values and care for our region's needs. In Riga summit, we set priorities. One of that was to involve United States, involve Ukraine into process of 3Cs initiative, as well as draw attention to like-minded partners outside the region, like countries like United Kingdom and Japan. Positive results in Riga summit were achieved. US DFC announced about 300 million investment into the Three Seas Investment Fund. Ukraine became a partner to the initiative. A strong interest from the United Kingdom and Japan was expressed during the Riga summit. Support pledged by the United States for Three Seas Initiative Investment Fund is very important for our region. It gives us encouragement and should instill confidence in private investors, not only from the US, but outside of the region as well. The Three Seas Initiative is not about boosting the economy of today, but also about building an economy for tomorrow. It is quite obvious that success of Three Seas initiative lies in effective cooperation between countries in the region and continued involvement of strategic partners. At the end of my presentation, I would like to express the words of appreciation to Poland for support to the Three Seas initiative and best wishes to Romania that will host the next Three Seas Initiative Summit and the Business Forum in 2023. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bondars. For those of your colleagues that are not very familiar to the Three Seas Initiative, please look at it because it's one of the success stories of the regional cooperation. Now, if you look at even the gas interconnectors that were built between our countries since the initiative started, like 2016, it shows up that it is really like progress in making. No, it's now we are much more resilient through the interconnectivity. No, in the energy market, but also in the with the energy, the classical other sources of energy that we are interlinked more. And then just recently with the new timetable of the Polish railway system, for the first time since whatever years, we have the direct train from Kraków to Vilnius. And I'm so happy about that because that the two capitals of the former Rzeczpospolita being back interconnected with that's through development of the railway interconnectivity between our countries. And I can tell you the stories. It goes and goes like that. It's the Via Carpatia, which would be the fast motorway from Tallinn in Estonia down to Greece. It's phenomenal how we are building up this backbone of this region through this interconnectivity, and this is the way we start thinking about that 6 years ago when we started the Three Seas Initiative, and I'm so happy that we can share this experience of a success with you all here in the United Nations. Okay, I should shut up because I was working for the Three Seas for 6 years, so I'm so much a part of the initiative, so I don't want to speak too long. So please let me introduce our second speaker, Mr. Shu Nakagawa from Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Pildegovics and Ambassador Shchersky for inviting us for this meeting. I'm very pleased that Japan is a co-sponsor of today's event on the important topic of infrastructure connectivity, which was organized under the initiative of Poland and Latvia. First, I would like to introduce the EU-Japan Connectivity Partnership. This partnership is one of the key pillars of cooperation between the EU and Japan, signed in September 2019 between the late Prime Minister Abe and the European Commission President Juncker. The initiative aims to promote global cooperation not only in infrastructure in the areas of digital connectivity, transportation, energy, and human mobility in the Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Indo-Pacific, Africa, etc. As the international community faces numerous challenges such as infectious diseases, climate change, and natural disasters, as well as the war in Ukraine and the food and energy crisis, collaboration between the EU and Japan has become more important than ever, including the Partnership for Connectivity, recognizing the specific challenges faced by developing countries and working together to ensure that their infrastructure needs are met in a transparent manner. We welcomed the EU's announcement of the Global Gateway in December 2021 as a platform to improve international connectivity. Following the connectivity partnership, the EU and Japan launched the EU-Japan Green Alliance in 2021 and the EU-Japan Digital Partnership in 2022. We wish to promote concrete cooperation utilizing existing frameworks. In addition, the use of private sector funds and technology is indispensable in advancing concrete cooperation. The Japanese government would like to work closely with JBIC, JICA, JETRO, NEXI, and other Japanese organizations in all Japan effort. There are already many good examples of EU-Japan collaboration, such as projects to finance wind farms in the Gulf of Suez in Egypt and the Olkaria geothermal power station in Kenya. In Romania, Japanese and Italian companies are building the iconic Brăila Bridge over the Danube River, the longest suspension bridge in the country, and the third longest in the EU. When completed at the end of this year, the project is expected to contribute to the promotion of Ukrainian grain exports through Romania. I'd also like to mention the 3Cs initiative. Today, strengthening the cohesion and connectivity of the Baltic states and Central and Eastern Europe is an urgent issue, and the 3Cs initiative has become more important than ever. On June 20 of this year, when the 3Cs initiative summit meeting was held in Latvia, Japan's Foreign Minister Hayashi issued a message on behalf of the Japanese government, mentioning Japan's desire to strengthen its involvement in the 3Cs initiative. Japanese companies, with their cutting-edge technology and expertise, can contribute to the enhancement of connectivity and infrastructure development that the 3Cs initiative emphasizes. We intend to promote the active participation of Japanese companies in projects under the initiative. With regard to the Indo-Pacific region, Japan advocates for a free and open Indo-Pacific, abbreviated FOIP. The improvement of connectivity is one of the three pillars of FOIP, along with the realization of universal values and efforts for maritime security. In May of this year, Prime Minister Kishida participated in the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, where he announced that Japan, as chair of the G7 chair and an advocate of the FOIP, will announce a free and open Indo-Pacific plan for peace, which will strengthen Japan's efforts to further promote the FOIP by next spring. In September 2021, the EU released the joint communication on the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Japan welcomes the joint communication as well as the strategy's concrete initiatives for the future. We also welcome NATO's increasing involvement in the Indo-Pacific region. We are very encouraged by the activities of the EU and NATO that align with Japan's thinking of FOIP. Concrete cooperation between the EU and Japan on connectivity based on the Partnership for Connectivity is a major driving force for the realization of the FOIP. We would like to further strengthen the FOIP by deepening our cooperation, including on intra-regional and inter-regional connectivity. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to inform you that on the day after tomorrow, December 15th, the group of Friends of Human Security will hold a meeting, co-chaired by Japan, Costa Rica, and Senegal, at 9 a.m. in room 1523 of the Secretariat Building at UN headquarters. The theme of this meeting is Human Security and Health. This Friends group is not a membership group, and we encourage all of you to register in advance to attend. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakagawa. And now I just have a pleasure to give a floor to Madam Fabian Irawati Mamesach, the head of the economic section of the Parliament Mission of Indonesia, the G20 chair.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Good afternoon. It is indeed a pleasure for me to be here and to take part in this very important dialogue on this important topic. And we have heard from previous speaker that resilient infrastructure is needed and indeed crucial, learning from the pandemic, and also we learned that the vulnerability on supply chain and infrastructure is indeed concrete, and collaboration in addressing this issue is very much crucial. I would like to take this opportunity to share Indonesia's experience and views on building resilience infrastructure from this perspective of Indonesia as a disaster-prone country that sits on the disaster-prone region, and as well as in the context of the G20. And as you know, that Indonesia is situated in the disaster-prone region, and this year alone we have experienced 3,350 disasters, and this caused more than 5 million people forced to leave their homes because of their house are destroyed, and also many public infrastructures also destroyed. Annually, we suffered more than 22 trillion rupiah of economic loss, and the climate change also exacerbates the condition where 95% of more disasters are driven by the impact of climate change. So understanding these circumstances, we put a lot of importance on building resilience, and that also includes ensuring the resilient infrastructure. Within the G20 context, allow me also to share two important takeaways from the last month G20 summit. First, that all countries, big and small, north and south, have an equal stake in shaping global agenda and addressing global challenges. We all have the responsibility and to collaborate in the global governance and in finding solution to the challenges that we face. And we prove that developing countries can also take the lead in shaping the global agenda. And secondly, we also we have to focus on achieving concrete and impactful result of our people for the benefit of our people and the world. So under the theme Recover Stronger, Recover Stronger, Indonesia G20 presidency give priority on three areas as a focus for a strong and sustainable recovery, namely strengthening global health infrastructure, energy transition, and also digital transformation. As you know that Indonesia's G20 presidency is under challenging circumstances, but Indonesia not only produce narratives but also try to deliver a concrete result. And as an evidence that there was 365 concrete projects valued of around 300 billion US dollars. That many of those concrete projects are also dedicated for developing and least developed countries. Many of the projects also include the food security, building disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation capacities in many developing countries and least developing countries, and strengthening developing countries' pandemic response and health infrastructure to the financial intermediary funds or pandemic fund. To date, the G20 Pandemic Fund, which is hosted by the World Bank, has managed to gather 1.4 billion US dollars, and this number is also expected to grow, as we also expect more donation coming from philanthropies, private sectors, and also from the donor countries. Another thing is that we also focus on the climate change and the impact of the climate change. That it is indeed the greatest threat that facing us today, and the 2033 midterm review of Sender Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is an opportunity to strengthen our capacity on disaster risk reduction capacities and also have a strong and effective multi-hazards early warning system. And in this context, the G20 summit also aimed to produce a clear roadmap that also to address the impact of the climate change, especially related to energy transition. And the efforts is to find solution to achieve energy market stability, transparency, and affordability to the Bali Compact and energy transition roadmap. And Indonesia itself, in this regard, is also targeting to be carbon neutral by 2060. We will be begin closing coal-fired plants by 2030. And on quality infrastructure itself, the G20 has declared that partnership is needed for inclusive and quality infrastructure investment that will lead to stronger recovery and resilience. We have G20 infrastructure working group that met last in June and focusing on 4 priorities. First one was develop a framework to best leverage sustainable infrastructure financing, particularly through mobilizing private sector resources to complement investment from other sources, including public investment and finance provided by multilateral development banks. Secondly, develop a policy toolkit to mobilize financing mechanism to enhance infrastructure investment in the region and the cities. Explore ways to facilitate financing and development of more cost-efficient and better quality infratech and digital infrastructure, and as well as discuss ways to advance the work related to principle for quality infrastructure investment, which we call QII, including the progressing the possibility of QII indicators. The G20 Investors Dialogue has been established, and it is also expected to organize a meeting every year to bring the institutional investors' perspective and developing countries' perspective together to discuss ways to scale up priority sector participation in infrastructure and potential areas of international collaboration. Last month, the leaders also endorsed the voluntary and non-binding G20 GI Hub framework on how to best leverage private sector participation to scale up sustainable infrastructure investment, which will consider country circumstances, including public investment and finance provided by MDBs. And also we focus on digital divide, narrowing the digital divide, and leaders also endorse Infra Tracker 2.0, which will enable both the public and private sectors towards transformative infrastructure investment post-COVID-19 by providing insight into long-term infrastructure strategies and plans. I would also like to take this opportunity to underline that Indonesia is also again prioritize the disaster risk reduction agenda, and we believe that resilient infrastructure provides communities and the environment with their first line of defense against disaster and critical for the support that provides recovery after the crisis. And as a co-facilitator of the negotiation of the political declaration of the midterm review of the Sendai framework on disaster reduction, Indonesia look forward to hear views and inputs from all the member states and various stakeholders on how we can incorporate the resilient infrastructure into the political declaration. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker in the panel is Mr. Hugh Bainon, as I said, Deputy Chair of the UN Office for Disaster and Disaster Risk Reduction, which as I said, recently published a report on principles for resilient infrastructure. So, sir, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam President, Excellencies, delegates, and colleagues. I think you'll be listening to me as we hit the 90-minute mark of the match, so we might hear some screaming midway. But really want to thank the co-organizers, Latvia and Poland, as well as Japan, for inviting UNDRR to speak today. this discussion really is so timely, and the quality of infrastructure will really make or break the achievement of the SDGs. As we approach the midterm review of the Sendai framework that's been mentioned, as well as the midterm review of the SDGs, we really must reflect on whether infrastructure investments are reducing risk and building resilience, or are they creating risks that will have devastating impacts for future generations. Unfortunately, in this year, I think billion-dollar disasters have become the norm. The cost of damage in the recent flooding in Pakistan might exceed 14 billion. The earthquake in Indonesia, the damage might exceed 12 billion. And here in the United States, this year alone, disaster-damaged infrastructure reached almost 100 billion. But these disasters, we know, are not natural. While the hazard is a natural phenomenon, we know that disasters are the consequences of policy and investment decisions in all sectors that were made without sufficiently considering disaster risk. And the IPCC has already warned about the perils ahead of maladaptation and the impacts of that. So the Sendai framework, I'm sure you're all familiar with the framework, it gives the global blueprint for reducing risk and building resilience. It gives us guidance for an approach to prevention that moves beyond simply managing the disaster event and its impacts to really managing the risk by systematically reducing existing risk and preventing the creation of new risk across all social, economic, and environmental systems. And it calls for a multi-hazard and multidimensional approach that goes beyond just looking at natural hazards to include environmental, technological, and biological hazards and their interrelation. And resilient infrastructure systems really are at the core of the Sendai framework. The principle of building back better, some would say building forward better, but the same idea, has gained much traction since COVID-19 pandemic. But building back better doesn't happen automatically. Really, in fact, it's extremely challenging in a post-disaster context. So the Sendai framework calls on all countries to ensure that the policies, capacities, and resources to build back better are actually in place before a disaster hits. But building back better is not enough. The Sendai framework also calls to build better from the start. I think that's what we're here to discuss today. All new public and private investment for infrastructure in all sectors should be disaster resilient to withstand hazard through proper design and construction standards. This requires standards, legislation, regulations for disaster risk-informed infrastructure. And multi-hazard risk assessments really must be a prerequisite for any investments and project approval of infrastructure. And Target D of the Sendai framework is focused on this issue. It also shares indicators with SDG 11, and it tracks progress in reducing disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. Unsurprisingly, progress towards this target is not on track. The global number of critical infrastructure units and facilities destroyed or damaged by disasters between 2015 and 2021 averaged 140,000 globally. And we know this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So it's clear that urgent action is needed on infrastructure resilience. And earlier this year, UNDRR embarked on a process to develop the principles for resilient infrastructure. This was done in consultation with over 100 governments, businesses, academic institutions, and civil society organizations. And the principles are intended to be used by any level of government, any institution, donor, investor, designer, service provider who's interested in improving the resilience of their infrastructure. And the ultimate goal is really to achieve regulatory and policy change for enhancing infrastructure resilience on a national scale. And these principles, they build on and they aim to support the implementation of the G20 principles for quality infrastructure investment. If you allow me to briefly outline the 6 principles. Principle 1 is about continuously learning. It's grounded in application of scientific evidence, and the goal is to strengthen understanding of and provide insight into infrastructure resilience, to validate and to test our assumptions of how resilient our infrastructure systems actually are, and looking at that complexity and the hyperconnectivity of infrastructure across systems, but also across borders. And the ultimate aim of this priority is to formulate strategies for infrastructure resilience and improvements that are based on assessments of future risks, real-time monitoring of the resilience of systems, and analysis of previous disturbances. Principle 2 is proactively protected, and the goal is to plan proactively to design, build, and operate infrastructure systems that are prepared for current and future hazards. This includes, I think was already mentioned, about raising the baseline for infrastructure system safety requirements, improving maintenance, improving design standards for critical components of national infrastructure systems. And the ultimate aim of this principle is to really avoid the risk of cascading failures that I think we've seen so often this year. COVID is one example. And to ensure that when infrastructure does fail, it's still safe. Priority 3 is focused on environmental integration, and the goal is to work in a positively integrated way with the natural environment by minimizing harm to, but also harm from the natural environment, and capitalizing on green-blue infrastructure with gray infrastructure. It's really nature-based solutions for infrastructure. Principle 4 is on socially engaged, and the goal here is to actively engage with people or communities so that they have a better understanding of how they can help prevent and respond to infrastructure disruptions. Priority 5, looking at shared responsibility. And this is quite important because it looks at sharing information, expertise around it with all infrastructure stakeholders, recognizing that it's much broader than just the service providers and governments. So looking at sharing information on common standards and practices, as well as data on risk and resilience, to really cultivate that collaboration and shared accountability for resilience across all infrastructure and service providers. And finally, it's about adaptively transforming. And this goal is to plan, design, construct, and deliver critical services that can adapt and transform. I think we've really come to realize that infrastructure systems need to be far more adaptive as the climate is changing and to be better respond to disasters. So together, these 6 principles aim to achieve what we've called net resilience gain. And this means ensuring that all interventions we make in infrastructure have a net positive contribution to national infrastructure systems and resilience to ensure that systems are uninterrupted in the event of a disaster. As for next steps, UNDRA is working with partners to develop a playbook to help countries implement these guidance, as well as tools for conducting stress tests of critical infrastructure and tools for building resilience across the real estate sector. And work is also underway to develop an ISO standard based on the principles to encourage their adoption and use at national level. So in closing, it's clear that we really need to make, I think, tangible progress on resilient infrastructure systems. It's already been mentioned that we need to see it as a system of assets, not individual assets, and we need that joined-up, interconnected approach across borders. I think in 2023, we have a real opportunity to make some, not just political progress, but also progress on the ground. Already been mentioned the progress that Indonesia made as G20 chair on promoting this issue, and India will take over as G20 president and will focus on resilient infrastructure within a working group on DRR. And in closing, a final plug for the Sendai Framework midterm review, which will be in May next year, a real opportunity to focus on some of the policy options and solutions needed to accelerate progress in this area and fill in some of the gaps, and really feed some solutions into the other intergovernmental processes coming up next year, thinking about the SDG Summit and then looking forward to the Summit of the Future. Member states will review the Samoa Pathway in the following year and the Vienna Programme of Action. Some real opportunities to have some strong commitments to resilient infrastructure. And as UNDRA are very ready here to support member states in this effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists for their insights and perspectives. I believe that it shows up that this thinking and discussion about the infrastructure, both here in New York, in our capitals, in different regional formats, will continue, and it's already in the center and will continue to be in the center in the coming months and years, especially looking from the perspective here in New York about looking for the SDG Summit, the high-level political forum on sustainable development. We'll review the SDG 9, as we heard the midterm review of the Sendai Framework, and all the other perspective of the both the current and the future presidency of the G20. This is all about the infrastructure, and this perspective of the resilient infrastructure is a part of this story, and I thank you very much for highlighting that. And saying about the center of the debate here in New York, before I open the floor to hear the perspectives of and the questions from all our distinguished participants during this event, let me just inform you that Poland, together with Bulgaria, Croatia, El Salvador, Estonia, Hungary, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, and Romania, is currently working on the draft plenary resolution titled Building Global Resilience Through Regional and Interregional Infrastructure Connectivity, to be considered by the UN General Assembly during this 77th session. We are planning to finalizing the draft and submitting it in January next year, so in a month's time. Our aim is to reconfirm the significance of infrastructure investment to deliver on all objectives of the 2030 Agenda and the critical role of infrastructure connectivity in strengthening resilience to the future shocks and crises. The draft resolution will be built on the General Assembly work on sustainable transport, access to energy and information and communications technologies for development, as well as disaster risk reduction, as well as the work of the wider UN system. So the key focus of the resolution will be, one, the infrastructure as a tool for building resilience to shocks and crises. Two, promotion of regional and inter-regional cooperation on infrastructure connectivity. So that's how we can and we want to contribute to this centralizing the debate on infrastructure here in New York through this proposal of the plenary resolution. And now I will open the floor for comments and discussion here. In the concept note, we have proposed the following questions to guide our discussion. What are the key preconditions for strengthening regional, interregional infrastructure connectivity? What are the lessons learned from your region, from different regions? Secondly, how to build resilience and improve the continuity of the critical services, such as energy, transport, and digital communications in terms of crises, including pandemics, conflicts, and climate change. And thirdly, what are the lessons learned from and the best practices with respect to developing sustainable and resilient infrastructure globally and in looking at it from the different regions. So we have the number of delegations that have already expressed the interest to take a floor. So I would start with those, and then if someone would like to join us, just please raise a hand, because there's no system working. We just have to be, I would say, not digital, but classical way of debating. So we got the first three on the list is the distinguished permanent representatives of Pakistan, Estonia, and the Republic of South Africa. Please, distinguished colleague, the chair of the G77 group of friends and all the other capacities, dear Munir, please take a floor.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And I'd like to thank all the sponsors, Latvia, Japan, Poland, for sponsoring this very interesting discussion and this initiative on infrastructure, connectivity, as well as resilience. As some of you may be aware, my delegation has been working for the past couple of years on a proposal or initiative which we call investment in sustainable infrastructure. Our approach was basically to pose the question as to how the international community could mobilize the roughly $1 trillion in investment that is required to be put into sustainable infrastructure if we are going to make the transition to a sustainable future global economy. That was the central question. And our discussions basically led to further consideration of two issues. Firstly is the obvious issue of finance. Where and how could we mobilize $1 trillion in investment annually, especially in developing countries? At the present moment, infrastructure investment, I may be wrong with numbers, but it's about $150 billion or so in developing countries annually, and most of that goes into what are called the emerging markets. So basically, 120, 130 developing countries do not receive FDI as such in infrastructure, much less sustainable infrastructure investment. So a large part of the world is out of the picture as far as infrastructure development is concerned. The second issue, which is related to the first, is how to attract the investment where it is not going in the developing countries. And the major shortcoming that we analyzed was the fact that there are no good sustainable infrastructure projects available in most developing countries, with some exceptions. There are some major countries, of course, who can develop those projects, but the large majority of developing countries do not have the capacity. And we reviewed the existing mechanisms, the World Bank, the G20, other mechanisms, to see exactly how much money was flowing to sustainable infrastructure in developing countries, and I think it is minimal. The World Bank invests less than $40 billion in infrastructure. I don't know what proportion of that is sustainable infrastructure. So we are facing a gulf in making the transition from the fossil fuel economy today to a green economy with infrastructure that is based on a sustainable or resilient nature. How do we bridge that gulf that we face? And I believe that the United Nations has a key role to play in this. We know that this ground has been occupied by the world banks of this world, the development banks. But I think the United Nations has got some unique capabilities. The first capability the United Nations has is that it has a network of over 130 country offices where resident coordinators can coordinate the work of many agencies, multi-dimensional agencies, and these country offices are in a well positioned to assist the developing countries concerned develop good projects which can attract public and even private investment. And the second element, I would think, is that the United Nations here at headquarters needs a multi-stakeholder policy board under senior leadership which can bring together the donor countries, the recipient countries, the private sector, the multilateral development banks, and other actors in order to evolve the kind of policies and the kind of approaches that are necessary to be able to connect private sector money or public money with the projects that are developed in the developing world by and with the assistance of the UN system. This is the simple proposition which we have presented. We will evolve it further. We have a group of friends which is co-chaired by South Africa and Pakistan. We will pursue this initiative in the coming months, and we hope that we will have a significant support from the international community. Before finishing, may I just recall all the conversation that was about resilient infrastructure. I think a country like mine, which has faced the destruction of about $30 billion worth of infrastructure, knows well the need for infrastructure and the need for resilient infrastructure. So Pakistan is preparing a plan we call it the 4RF plan, recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction, resilience, and we will present it at a conference in Geneva on the 9th of January for our partners to consider. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I see a huge field of convergence between the approaches we are discussing, and I'm surely the distinguished permanent representative of South Africa will continue on that. But before I give the floor to her, I just want to ask to speak the permanent representative of Estonia. Rein, please, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Gentlemen saw me, so problem solved. No, thank you very much for gathering us here for discussing this very, very important topic. I appreciate invitation. I appreciate interesting, very thoughtful views that were expressed here. On my side, let me say for the start that connectivity, both through digital and physical infrastructure, is these days, of course, a vital geostrategic importance. Connectivity today is a backbone of our security. It is a backbone of our economic development. It is also a backbone of the security of our people, our societies, and of a global economy, indeed, as it was mentioned. So it is also relevant, as it has been mentioned by Madam President, in the context of Agenda 2030, Global Digital Compact, and so on. I fully agree with this. I think that here we have wider support also among different countries. I would maybe say on top of this that when I look into in a retrospective, I would say that the theory of interdependence, as we know it, which was introduced in, if I'm not mistaken, 1977 or something like this, is not appealing anymore, in a way, because partially also because of Russia's war against Ukraine, has been another, after COVID, I would say, a harsh wake-up call on how interconnected we are, on the one hand, globally, but at the same time, how vulnerable we became, partially because of this connection. It is clear that we need to reduce our strategic dependencies, especially in the energy. Sufficient to mention the Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 projects here, I think, but also in the technology sector. So this would be my general introduction, and let me make now 3 points. I wanted to maybe to expand a little bit what Ambassador at Large mentioned, the concept of trusted connectivity, which is quite dear to the heart of my government and Estonians in general. So because of this need to reduce our strategic dependencies and so on, I mean, we prefer to do business with partners whom we can trust. And we need to ensure public confidence for different projects. So nations committed to upholding the rule-based international system order must mobilize their efforts to build relations of economic trust based on, preferably, of course, shared values and visions for the future. Free Seas Initiative was mentioned. I think this is exactly the case study here. Yes, it is a regional project, but I think of very high significance for those who are participating in this project. I would even go a little bit beyond and say that if you look to the European continent from the space, then you would see that Western Europe is shining bright. Eastern Europe, those who were occupied by Soviet Union, but also satellite states of Soviet Union, it's a dark spot because it's underdeveloped, underinvested, and so on. And Free Seas Initiative, I think, is a one initiative, regional initiative that tries to make it happen, to attract investments and to develop infrastructure in this region. So this is the idea of a trusted connectivity. It's a conceptual, so to say, framework enshrined in many connectivity initiatives. Building back, Beta has been mentioned here, Blue Dot Network, you mentioned, whatever. And under trusted, what we mean, of course, is connectivity projects that are rooted in common values, sustainability, good governance, high regulative and social standards, and of course security. So, you know, On a national level, I would maybe bring one example from my own country, where I would say that Estonia's e-governance platform, e-Estonia, is, and which holds trust of our citizens and thereby enables our government to offer nearly 99% of its services online, is one example of this on a national level, if you wish. Just to remind that in 21, for example, almost 50% of all those who participated in elections casted their vote electronically online because of this trust that exists towards the system. And finally, on the global level, regional/global, I would say, the EU's Global Gateway Initiative is a good example how we can strengthen together the resilience of different regions, and through this, of course, to invest into trusted connectivity projects concerning renewables, energy efficiency, hydrogen, green hydrogen, next generation networks, and so on and so forth. So, and I of course hope that there will be trust and connectivity built, of course, between Global Gateway and other corresponding projects. And of course, as a final remark, I would maybe say that I also hope that this EU's Global Gateway will be particularly also important when it comes to reconstruction of Ukraine, because they would badly need it. So these are the reasons why we very much support this resolution. I hope that we can attract a lot of support from cross-regional support to this, and I think it's highly relevant in this very difficult environment where we are operating now nationally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I give the floor to Permanent Representative of Republic of South Africa, followed by El Salvador, Uzbekistan, European Union, India, Romania, and Lithuania. That's what I have on my list so far. Matu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Works, thanks.
Thank you very much, and let me congratulate Latvia, Poland, and Japan for hosting this important meeting and for inviting us. And appreciate the comments that were shared. I will remember Ambassador Bonda's politically inspired but commercially viable, because at the end of the day, we as governments would be driven by politics, geopolitics, how we want to develop our regions and so forth. But we need to bring that aspect that it has to be commercially driven. At the end of the day, when you're going to say a bankable project, is it commercially viable? So thank you for that. I looked at your concept paper and I thought, okay, your third point, what are lessons learned and best practices? So I just want to comment on that. And looking at South Africa nationally, but looking at SADC, Southern African Development Community, and then the AU, of course. My colleague and friend Munir covered me in terms of the work that we are trying to do with a group of friends, so I will not touch on that. So when I think about South Africa, what we do nationally, I think leadership becomes important. So to the extent that for most of our countries, if infrastructure, for us, it's not even about building back better. For most of our countries, it's about building, sometimes building from scratch. So it's not about building back better. So if we're talking about building from scratch in many instances, where do you start and how do you do it? And of course, leadership is going to be important. Leadership within the country, leadership in the region, consensus among the regional leaders in terms of what they need. Regional master plans becomes important. So in the case of South Africa, we have a president who has identified that our challenges around inequality, around poverty reduction, around unemployment are going to be addressed through infrastructure development. But of course, now it has to be sustainable and resilient infrastructure development. But we have linked all of this to economic development within the country. And I think for most of us, that's going to be. Regionally, the same thing. For SADC, that has been acknowledged. And I think for the African Union, that has also been acknowledged that for us as a region, as Africa, our own underdevelopment, our economic development, progress has to be linked to integration, market integration, and therefore infrastructure becomes important even for achieving the SDGs. Secondly, I think the issue of partnership, other than leadership that ensures that we think about it carefully, we integrate it into our development plans. The issue of partnerships, how do we partner? And the private sector here comes to mind. There's hardly a project or an infrastructure project that you're going to put in place where you do not need a partnership, especially with the private sector. Now, we have to say, do you have the same kind of private sector across all regions, across all countries? So we need to be thinking, if it's a country where you have this level of private sector, what do you do? How do you leverage other resources to ensure infrastructure development in that particular country? But certainly, we've seen in South Africa's case, they have been quite useful, the private sector, especially in making sure that all those projects are bankable. They already adhere to some of the frameworks that we're talking about, whether it's from a Sendai framework, whether it's from a sustainability framework, whether it's sustainable for climate change and so forth. Those are technical requirements that can be very difficult, for some countries to work on their own. So partnerships with the private sector, partnerships with the UN, the resident coordinators that are on the ground and should be able to assist in preparing projects that can then be bankable, that can be acceptable to the investors, because you need investors for all of this. Then the third lesson and it's linked to the second one, is funding. And that's the commercial viability. If you're going to get funders for these projects, how do you make sure that they are? And I think what we've heard many times over is that the work is there, infrastructure needs to be developed, whether it's for water infrastructure, but how do you get funding? How do you get the private sector? Or how do you get even the multinational development banks or the IFIs? They will still require that those projects meet certain technical requirements. So funding becomes an issue. So to what extent are we addressing the issue of funding and providing technical assistance to countries to make sure that what they put forward is technically acceptable, and therefore their infrastructure development programs can succeed? Then lastly, South Africa is passionate about peace building, of course. And we argue that if you need this in economies where there is no conflict or it's not fragile states, can you imagine it is even more required? You even need it in post-conflict and fragile states. And where do you start? Because there's even more challenging. And within the Peace Building Commission, we have spearheaded a project, we call it Peace Positive Private Sector Development. And we are quite keen that we explore peace positive private sector development, because indeed, post-conflict, those countries do need a hope, and some of that hope is having infrastructure being developed in the countries, having the IFIs, having the MDBs, investing, and of course, when they are there, de-risking to some level, then you are able to attract private funding. So that blended financing between the IFIs, the Multinational Development Bank, private money, really looking at innovative ways of making sure that we are able to not leave behind countries in post-conflict context. And let me leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, District Representative of Permanent Representative of the Republic of South Africa. I think it was very important to broaden the scope of our work also for the context of peace building, and because this is really like part of the story, which is so much in the center of what the UN is doing. Okay, I got the next on the list, El Salvador, followed by Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Dziękuję bardzo. First of all, thank you for, my name is Carlos Segura, I'm the DPR of El Salvador to the United Nations. First of all, we thank you for making us miss the second half of the game, and for your information, the final score was 3-0. Argentina made it to the final, so that's good for Grulak. Thank you very much. We recognize the last seconds of the presence of the president of ECOSOC, who is now leaving. Thank you very much. And we thank the distinguished ambassadors, representatives of the Secretariat, all the panelists for this important event. Let me share with you some thoughts and, from our national perspective. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues. As El Salvador, we acknowledge the importance of building resilience through quality and sustainable infrastructure connectivity, particularly for an effective and inclusive recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic, natural disasters, and those exacerbated by climate change and geopolitical tensions and conflicts, alongside other multiple crises that have outstanding multiplier effects, undermining progress made towards achieving the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. We highlight that in order to redirect our efforts towards resilience, we must, of course, strengthen global solidarity through international cooperation and partnerships, ensure stability in international trade to reactivate the economy, promote structural transformation, including the reevaluation of the financial architecture, contribute to the mobilization of resources. This has been mentioned by some PRs that spoke before me, improving the share and implementation of best practices, plans, and programs, develop integral territorial planning at all levels, technology transfer and capacity building, taking into account the particular challenges of developing countries and populations in vulnerable situations. So we highlight that as a country that is dependent on natural resources and that also is located in one of the most vulnerable and highly impacted zones by climate change, according to the last IPCC report, as well as other impactful crises, the continuity of critical services is of utmost necessity for our progress. So for that reason, my country has taken measures in the energy, transportation, and digital communications sector. So in this sense, we are promoting strategic projects, carrying out mitigation works in high-risk areas, and boost innovative strategic projects in order to guarantee social inclusion and opportunities for all. On that note, El Salvador has planned to build a new airport and a shipyard to significantly revitalize the eastern part of the country, as well as the Train of the Pacific, in Spanish, El Tren del Pacífico, which will have 342 kilometers of the railway network and pretends to establish a connection with similar works in neighboring countries as well. So this is the regional perspective and that we're talking about. Currently, El Salvador is chairing the 12th Assembly of IRENA, which is the International Renewable Energy Agency. And we acknowledge that this alliance, particularly in the identification of our renewable energy potential, in order to execute long-term planning and strengthening regulatory frameworks, enabling conditions for energy development and collaboration of awareness of financial institutions. Also, our national digital agenda works to generate connectivity, coverage, and access, including the design and deployment of telecommunications network infrastructure that is necessary to connect the entire country, deliver digital public services, and promote the conditions for development of electronic commerce and a knowledge-based economy. Now, let me share with you a regional perspective. We are part of the Central American Integration System, which is the SICA, Sistema de la Integración Centroamericana. And let me share with you briefly some joint efforts towards resilience in the region demonstrated in the following spaces. For example, first of all, the Forum Towards a More Resilient Central America, in Spanish, Hacia una Centroamérica Más Resiliente, which looked forward to identify new challenges and opportunities to strengthen the regional disaster risk management agenda. Also, the Regional Mobility and Logistics Framework Policy, which looks forward for Central America to have a world-class logistics platform for the transfer of cargo and passengers for a more integrated and competitive region, capable of mobilizing the population and its supply chains effectively, increasing and diversifying its trade. So this initiative aims to develop a regional system articulating modern resilient logistics infrastructure that encompasses different modes of transport in 6 sectoral axes: maritime, port, aeronautical, airport, rail, land, coordinated border management, and urban logistics. And the last project I would like to mention today is the promotion of geothermal energy and its direct uses in Central America, contributing to reduce the dependency on fossil fuels in the region, taking advantage that most member states of SICA are located on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which offers the best conditions for obtaining energy from geothermal sources of the 75 volcanoes that we have in the region, and more than 1,300 hot springs, in order to encourage project developers, investors, and service providers. So to conclude, El Salvador recognizes that with the promotion of national and regional projects aimed at promoting resilience to be better prepared for combating multiple crises, we get closer to achieving the SDGs, as well as prosperity, peace, and well-being for our people and the planet for present and future generations. Therefore, it is necessary to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnerships for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the perspective of Central America. And now I give the floor to the representative of Uzbekistan, followed by Romania and the European Union.
Thank you very much. The co-chairs, distinguished delegations. First of all, I would like to thank the missions of Poland, Latvia, and Japan for arranging this important event. The connectivity issue is a really important factor when you look at it through the prism of sustainable development. Today we have heard panelists' statements and conversation and national prospects, and I see so many convergences on our approaches to this, I would say, strategically important issue as a precondition for streamlining the global efforts. As a matter of fact, in recent years, the concept of connectivity as such has become an essential item in the agenda of the United Nations and has been playing a key role in a human-focused approach, leaving no one behind as well. The connectivity plays a key role in trade, economic growth, and sustainable development, and also contributes to strengthening regional cooperation and developing friendly relations among nations. I would like to reiterate the utmost importance of transportation networks in sustainable development, especially for a doubly landlocked country such as Uzbekistan. As a concept, the development of the connectivity between regions has become one of the top priority objectives in the foreign policy of Uzbekistan. Given this fact, for the past few years, Uzbekistan has been making coherent efforts on addressing issues of advancing regional transport connectivity through encouraging investments into the construction of new highways and railroads. Here I want to mention resilient infrastructure, the notion that has been much elaborated here, and the distinguished ambassador of Pakistan made a strategic outlook differentiating how to build and also how to sustain. Here, I want to zoom in the regional efforts, and I want to share our connectivity development efforts. And here are two major burgeoning projects, and hope one day they will become best practices that we can share with the world community. In particular, I mean the Central and South Asia connectivity efforts. Uzbekistan strongly advocates for the expansion of the infrastructure connectivity between these two regions as a key for ensuring stability and sustainable development of these two regions. At the initiative of President of Uzbekistan in July 2021, Uzbekistan hosted a high-level international conference entitled Central and South Asia Regional Connectivity. Eventually, the outcome of this conference has become the UN General Assembly Central and South Asia Connectivity Resolution tabled by Uzbekistan. And here I once more extend our gratitude for the co-sponsoring and supporting member states. Distinguished participants, yet another connectivity development process I want to mention here is being launched by the European Union and the Central Asia states, which was aimed at consistent deepening of our region's cooperation with the European Union in a number of priority areas. As you may know, in October, the first EU and Central Asia summit took place, and was hosted by Kazakhstan, and which was a start of the connectivity development efforts between two regions. Immediately after, on 18th of November, Uzbekistan hosted the first conference on interconnectivity of the European Union and Central Asia as a global gateway for sustainable development, with the participation of Mr. Joseph Borrell, the EU High Representative Foreign Affairs and Security, and the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Central Asian countries. This was actually the continuation of the summit, but in practical terms. Uzbekistan believes that in the development of the connectivity between the two dynamically developing regions, special attention should be paid to such priority areas as digital transformation, transport interconnectivity, and green growth projects. We are confident that a number of initiatives of the European Union in these directions will serve to create the most optimal and efficient transit and logistics infrastructure. And I just wanted to refer to Ambassador Bondar's definition of the 3 C's initiative, which is being politically inspired and commercially driven. Under the circumstances of the Central Asia, the connectivity development concepts work all the way around. They are economically inspired and politically driven. So having said that, let me conclude my remarks by stressing the critical importance of developing a regional vision and cooperation concepts in building and maintaining sustainable, resilient connectivity between the regions, in particular Central Asia and the European Union, in line with the European Union's Global Gateway strategy and the national transport and transit development policies of the Central Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the second definition. And now I give the floor to the representative of Romania, followed by the European Union, India, and Lithuania.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And let me echo the other delegations in thanking you for organizing this event. As you know, Romania is pleased to be part of the core group that proposes a resolution on building resilience through quality and sustainable infrastructure connectivity. Well, if you look at geography, Romania is situated between Europe, Asia, we're close to Africa. Being a Latin-speaking country, we're also close to Latin America, so we support Argentina's win, of course. Connectivity is important to us, and it means sharing values and aiming to achieve, but also implement the highest standards, including in the realm of multilateralism. So these are the main reasons that made us to take the leap of faith and to support this resolution. And coming back to the paper that we have in front of us, let me just react to the questions that were put forward. So the COVID pandemic represents the most recent example on how vulnerable and interconnected. Sorry. You see, this is what happens when you read. So the COVID pandemic, posed a lot of challenges to us. The pandemic didn't negatively impact only some aspects of our lives, but it challenged and changed the way we communicate, the way we care for others, and educate our children. We work, we travel, and other aspects. Experts say that effects of the pandemic will last until the end of this decade. Coincidence or not, this is also when we have to deliver on our 2030 agenda. So instead of complaining about COVID-19 negative impact, the UN community has now the chance to draw the lessons learned, to correct the mistakes, and to go further in a holistic manner by building resilience. And this resolution that we are starting to discuss is one modality to address it. We should also look at the upcoming UN big conferences, that is the LDCs and the UN Water Conference in 2023, but also the LLDCs and the SEEDS conferences in 2024. So infrastructure connectivity is relevant in these contexts as it makes a difference for everyday's life. And we all need to get together and to try and address the infrastructure gaps, including the digital ones. My delegation is actively involved in ensuring energy connectivity with our neighbors, given the recent attacks by Russia on the Ukrainian civil infrastructure that affected the electrical and energy grids of both Ukraine and Moldova. And this is our take in supporting resilience of others. We remain committed to work together with delegations in having this resolution adopted in a successful way so as no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the opinion from the future presidency of the Three Seas Initiative. And now I give the floor to, already mentioned many times, the European Union. And then followed by India and Lithuania. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Poland, Latvia, and Japan for organizing this very important meeting, which I think shows that how central the issue of sustainable infrastructure is to the acceleration of the 2030, the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And indeed, Global Gateway has been mentioned several times because, and that's probably because the EU is convinced that making a difference on sustainable infrastructure is what will make the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And the Global Gateway is the EU response to that challenge. Global Gateway is not a template. In the area of sustainable development, we are all learning by doing, and the difference is probably only made through our ability to learn. And within Global Gateway, the EU has tried to integrate as many as possible of these lessons from the past. And there are three elements that I would like to mention. Sustainability is key to what would be labeled Global Gateway programs. And we are not only talking about climate resilience, respect of nature and biodiversity. We're also talking about human rights. We're also talking about social standards, about decent work, and of course, gender equality. Another element of Global Gateway, which is part of this concept of sustainable infrastructure, is about funding. That has been mentioned several times, and that will be key. There is no sustainable or resilient infrastructure that can be built on the cheap. It costs money. It costs a lot of money. And, well, we have assembled a budget, an overall budget for Global Gateway to the tune of 300 billion euro. That's a lot of money, even though when we quote figures like this, nobody knows any longer what this actually means. But that includes grants from the EU budget. That includes also our estimate of leverage that we will get from European development banks. And on top of this, there will be EU member states' contributions. What will be key in the success of Global Gateway will be the participation of the private sector. That's part of the leverage that I was mentioning. And what's key to the participation of the private sector to investment projects, as has been mentioned already, is the investment climate and the regulatory environment in specific regions and countries. So with Global Gateway, there is necessarily a component of policy dialogue and country ownership that goes with it, and that is absolutely key. Another element, a third element that I would like to mention is the fact that Global Gateway infrastructure projects should be seen in, and that has been mentioned also, in an economic development perspective. One could also call it a territorial development perspective in what specialists call a strategic corridor approach. That means that Global Gateway projects will be bundles of programs and projects that will be centered around infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure, but also digital infrastructure, energy infrastructure. And around this, there will be a number of projects which will be associated, funded by other partners or by the European Union if there are opportunities on education, on job creation, on digitalization, on the regulatory environment, everything that goes, that makes it possible to have an infrastructure project successful in a territorial development approach. I could give a number of examples because, yeah, as was said, Global Gateway was announced one year ago. This year we've used to identify and design projects in partnership with governments. And now the projects are being launched. So for example, there is a railway rehabilitation program investment which has been decided in North Macedonia and Bulgaria, which is worth €500 million. In the energy sector, there will be investment in the Trans-Balkan electricity corridor to connect the transmission system of Serbia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina to Croatia, Hungary, Romania, and Italy. There will be green hydrogen projects with countries like Namibia, Kazakhstan, and also as part of the Just Transition Partnership with Indonesia and South Africa. And in the digital sector, just announced has been the Medusa optical fiber submarine cable to connect Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia and Cyprus, France, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. These are only examples of projects. There are many more coming up, and there will be 40 projects which will be announced by the end of this week for Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Asia-Pacific regions. So I would just like to end by underscoring that the UN is certainly an important forum to discuss this type of issues. It is, again, an area where everyone has got to be very humble. We are learning by doing. We need to cross experience, cross knowledge. And the UN is, with its convening capacity, is the area, the place, the forum where this kind of exchanges can take place. And again, this exercise is part of our collective contribution to accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very, very useful and informative. And now I have 4 speakers for 15 minutes, just to remind the time. So we got the India, Lithuania, Ukraine, and the International Human Rights Commission. So India, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Thanks to Latvia and Poland for organizing this timely event, and thanks to our panelists. I'll try to be quick. Quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure has been at the core of India's pursuit of development and in building partnerships. We are convinced that the road to sustainable development and the 2030 agenda can only be achieved by sharing the gains we've made since 2015. And in this regard, I want to focus my comments on 3 points: CDRI, G20, and the climate change and resilient infrastructure. On CDRI, as many of you know, India launched the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, announced in 2019 and launched in March 2020. It functions as an inclusive, multi-stakeholder partnership of various national governments, UN agencies and programs, multilateral development banks, where knowledge is generated and exchanged on different aspects of disaster resilience of infrastructure. As on date, CDRI has 31 countries and 8 international organizations as members. CDRI is curating the global flagship report on disaster and climate resilient infrastructure, which will be the first comprehensive report on infrastructure resilience, assessing the global risk of the infrastructure systems. It will be available to governments and policymakers to adopt measures while framing the disaster preparedness and infrastructure policies. And the first report will be launched at the G20 Summit in 2023, September, and will thereon be published every 2 years. Number 2, another initiative of CDRI, Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, was launched at the World's Leader Summit at COP26 in Glasgow, and this is being rolled out. IRIS is an initiative to provide technical support on infrastructure systems and promote disaster and climate resilience of infrastructure assets, particularly in the SIDS countries, and share latest knowledge targeted to specific infrastructure sectors. IRIS has received funding commitments from the UK, Australia, and the EU so far. Number 3, CDRI launched the Infrastructure Resilience Accelerator Fund, a dedicated international multi-donor trust fund, currently with a total financial commitment of $50 million at COP27. Established with the support of UNDP and UNDRR, the fund will be managed by the United Nations Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office to support DRI, particularly in developing countries and the SIDS countries through customized technical assistance, capacity building, research, knowledge management, and advocacy. CDRI has initiated work to undertake projects with various countries in the areas of drinking water, wastewater, electricity, roads, oceans and river ports, airports, mobile communications, etc. Let me turn to G20. India took over the presidency of the G20 on 1st December. As we speak, several meetings are being held in India across various locations. The development working group under the Sherpa track is currently meeting in Mumbai, and the finance track is meeting in Bengaluru. India's 5 priorities of the presidency are as follows. Number 1, public digital goods and digital infrastructure. Number 2, climate action, climate finance, and technology collaboration. Number 3, clean, sustainable, just, affordable, and inclusive energy transition. Number 4, accelerated progress on sustainable development goals. Number 5, women-led development. Number 6, multilateral reforms. The conversations on the various tracks are going to be woven around these themes. As it can be seen, India's priorities reflect not just the aspirations of the G20 members, but of the global South. India is pursuing an inclusive, ambitious, decisive, and action-oriented approach. And on the development working group, some key discussions of priority will be on the green development, including climate change and financing, just energy transitions, lifestyle for environment, accelerating implementation of the SDGs, and digital public goods data for development. Number 3, I just want to highlight some areas of climate-related projects. India is currently participating in 200 development projects across the globe, worth over 7.6 billion. And these relate to agricultural projects, green energy, solar projects, green connectivity, and water projects. In short, Chair, the path to building resilience through quality and sustainable infrastructure connectivity is by forging solid partnerships that really deliver outcomes. At both bilateral and multilateral levels, India has been pursuing the growth of its partners in the spirit of our G20 theme that we are one family, one earth, and one future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That was super interesting. And so now I give the floor to Lithuania, followed by Ukraine.
I would like to thank Latvia, Poland, and Japan for organizing this timely and extremely relevant event on the role of infrastructure connectivity in building resilience. Our ambassador was also pretty much looking forward to attend the event. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he was not able to, but however, I will convene his message. So Lithuania also very much appreciate Polish initiative and work on this topic at the UN. Lithuania is also very actively involved in the core group. Indeed, in the wake of multiple and interlinked global crises, including COVID-19 pandemic, unjustified and unprovoked Russian war in Ukraine, food insecurity, and climate change, regional initiatives on infrastructure connectivity are becoming increasingly important in building resilience. Russian war in Ukraine in particular illustrates how regional conflict might have a global impact in terms of displacement, food supply disruptions, volatile energy markets, even though, as what was correctly pointed out, different regions are not affected in the same way. It is for this reason that regional approaches are critical to enhance global solutions. So, talking about regional approaches, Lithuania sees Three Seas initiative as a valuable format to strengthen cooperation, increase infrastructure connectivity, economic security, and strategic resilience of the region. We are very much looking forward to advance the initiative and make it more operational and also focused on practical results. Would also like to stress, as was pointed out by the ambassador from Latvia, the importance of the Three Seas Initiative Riga Summit and Business Forum, and especially the inclusion of Ukraine in this format. The Three Seas Initiative platform should be used to support Ukraine's recovery, and at the same time involving Ukraine in the implementation of Three Seas Initiative regional infrastructure projects that would help to improve EU-Ukraine connectivity. Lithuania sees a huge value in Three Seas Initiative transatlantic cooperation and partnership and advocate for greater involvement of the partners, so European Commission, the US, Germany, as well as attracting other like-minded countries such as Japan, Canada, United Kingdom. And at the same time, we also very much support the Global Gateway program that is aiming to deliver trusted connectivity around the globe. We have been consistently underlying the importance to offer developing countries progressive, market-driven, and sustainable initiatives that would strengthen global resilience and inclusive recovery from the crisis. And if I may, one possible question for the panelists. So how to better communicate connectivity projects, for example, such as Global Gateway, to external audiences and make it sound less technocratic and more user-friendly? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it was already been mentioned many times, our friends from Ukraine. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm joining others in thanking delegations of Latvia, Poland, and Japan for convening this event. We see significant value in the 3C initiative, and we are pleased to have a partnership with this. We consider this initiative as very promising from the point of view of interaction in various spheres: economic, energy, transport, and others. In this context, sustainable infrastructure connectivity should make a contribution to building the resilience, the global resilience. We also see a perspective for the future, among other things, the involvement of the initiative in the reconstruction of Ukraine, as already mentioned. But now we are resisting the Russian attack. This war started not in February this year, but much earlier, back in 2014, with the illegal annexation of Crimea and occupation of Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. And even then, in 2016-17, when Ukraine was a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, we understood the essence of the Russian Federation and predicted the means that it was able to use in the military actions against Ukraine that we were ongoing at time. In other words, the problem of the threat of Ukraine infrastructure did not arise in 2022, but much earlier. This was one of the reasons why Ukraine, during its presidency in the UN Security Council, introduced a resolution on the protection of critical infrastructure from terrorist attacks. It was adopted on 13 of February 2017 by consensus under the number 2341. Remarkably, it was co-sponsored by 41 states. Today we are we also under the attack, and our infrastructure also under attack. Currently, about 50% of Ukrainian critical electric power infrastructure is significantly damaged, and some elements are completely destroyed because of Russian energy terror, also called transformer war, because electric transformers seem to be the main target of Russian armed forces last month. I have more remarks, but I will stop here and will say that we are looking forward to the draft resolution on the issue of infrastructure connectivity, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague. And the final floor goes, the microphone goes to the civil society representative, the International Human Rights Commission. Please.
I thank gentlemen in my front and a gentleman in my back for letting me speak. Thank you. My name is Ambassador Malik Nadeem Abid, and I'm the Secretary General of International Human Rights Commission. We are an intergovernmental organization, and we monitor human rights, electoral systems, and of course, these are the major things, and public corruption. We have some serious concern about serious human rights violations in many of the countries which may need your support for infrastructure development. So we very humbly suggest that there should be some clauses tied to the resources provided. Number one, human rights conditions in those countries should be monitored and should be tied with the support and financial aid provided. And second, accountability of those funds should also be monitored, because many of the countries we go to, we see a serious corruption in the public sector and government sector. So the funds you provide may not end up in being used for the infrastructure development or for the projects which are there provided. So we very humbly suggest that you should keep these two things in mind when you provide these resources. And once again, thank you so much to gentlemen in the front and the gentlemen in the back.
Thank you very much. That was quick and to the point. And Now I give the floor to my colleague, Ambassador of Latvia, for closing remarks. Thank you very much for all the participants for the very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Christoph, for navigating this very rich discussion. On behalf of all organizers of this event, I would like to thank everyone contributing for this rich and valuable discussion today. Special thanks, of course, to our speakers, President of ECOSOC, Ambassador Bondars, Mr. Nakagawa from the Mission of Japan, Ms. Mamesa from the Mission of Indonesia, Mr. Bayon from the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction. I want to thank all PRs, DPRs, experts, representatives of civil society who have contributed to highlighting your priorities. I think we have all benefited from your regional, sub-regional perspectives. We have heard the views from Central America, from Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, from European Union, from Pacific region. I think I have from India. I think it's been from Ukraine, of course. We have heard a lot of valuable ideas about trusted connectivity, enhanced connectivity, about necessary standards which we have to take into consideration. We talked about the future steps. I think this discussion has been very forward-looking, and hopefully it has been useful for the work ahead next year. Ambassador Shevsky already provided a kind of sneak peek, a reference on what to expect in January with regard to a new draft of GA resolution on infrastructure resilience. We have also heard throughout the discussion of some of expectations for the high-level processes in ECOSOC, in the General Assembly. I also hope that our discussion today is a modest contribution to our joint efforts and discourse on our common agenda, on the Summit for the Future preparations, which will, of course, speak on resilience in the context of climate change, international trade, supply chains. That said, at the end of the day, what really counts are expectations of the people in our countries, what they will have reliable and affordable, sustainable electricity to power their everyday lives, that they will have access to well-developed transportation networks that can connect people's goods and services, that they will have meaningful and trusted internet connectivity. And all these expectations require continuous work as the backbone of our economies and societies to develop and maintain the quality, sustainable, resilient infrastructure in line with the principles of good governance, rule of law, human rights. I fully subscribe to the last speaker's point, and international norms, as well as high environmental and social standards. We have heard today that regional cooperation, sub-regional cooperation in this area offers significant benefits, but it's not without challenges and requires persistent work and dedication to enhance political, economic cooperation, multi-stakeholder approach. And we also heard about the strain on climate change, natural disasters, putting on infrastructure, and the work of UN disaster risk reduction, G20 and other coalitions of countries undertaking to alleviate the discussion on infrastructure resilience. I thank again all colleagues from missions of Poland, Latvia, and Japan, second committee experts for very thorough preparatory work. And I would like to invite everyone here in person who is not rushing. Please join us for some snacks and coffee outside the conference room. And I want to use this occasion to wish you all restful holiday season and hope to see you in January in a core group and in preparatory meetings for the GA resolution on infrastructure resilience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we finished on time, which is very important.
Well done.
Well done. Super.
Thank you.